Good morning, my friends. Welcome to the Pirate Therapist podcast. You are sitting in the captain's quarters, staring at a glowing rectangle. The map to the rest of the world is right there in your hands. You can send a message in a bottle at the speed of light and get 100 responses before the hourglass drops its last grain of sand. And yet, the cabin feels freezing. The ship feels empty. You have 1,000 connections, but no one is there to help you hoist the sails. I would like to welcome you back to the Pirate Therapist podcast. And today we're talking about why that digital compass is spinning in circles and why science says there is absolutely no substitute for standing shoulder to shoulder with your crew. I am Lee Perry. I am the Pirate Therapist, and I want to welcome you to this week's episode on the need for real human connection. So let's talk about the illusion of this digital harbor, if you will. Let's get one thing straight before we start throwing our phones overboard. Digital connection is not the enemy. If you're caught in a storm, if social anxiety has you barricaded below decks, or if physical limitations keep you from making it to the tavern, that digital lifeline is incredible. It bridges the distance that used to take months to cross. But here's the problem. We've started treating the map like it's an actual territory. Research out of Ohio State and BYU found that while a digital check-in can keep us afloat, they're just a baseline. When we swap out all of our face-to-face time for texts and video calls, we actually start taking on water. We feel more isolated, not less. We're drinking salt water and wondering why we're still thirsty. So let me talk to you about how that salt water rots the hull of our mental health. The digital world is brilliant at mimicking connection, but it's really more of a ghost ship. You see the sails, you hear the creak of the wood, but when you step aboard, there's no crew at all. When we rely entirely on our screens, we slip into what I call an ambient isolation. You are constantly surrounded by the chatter of 1,000 distant voices, social media feeds, endless text chains, the ping of Discord servers, but nobody actually is looking you in the eye. Now, from an attachment perspective, our brains desperately need a mirror. We need someone to reflect our emotions back to us in a real time to feel secure. When you send a text out into the void about a genuinely hard day and you just get a little heart emoji tapped back 3 hours later, your nervous system does not register that as safety or comfort. It registers it as a delay or a void. Over time, this constant diet of low stakes, highly curated communication starves our core sense of belonging. The digital world removes the friction of a human interaction, but we need that friction to feel anchored. Without the messy, unscripted reality of sharing physical space, we become marooned in our own little digital islands. We convince ourselves we're all connected just because the Wi Fi signal is strong, all while our actual social muscles are atrophying. We lose the grit, the grace, and the deep emotional nourishment that it takes to navigate real face to face human conversation. We survive the storm, sure, but we forget how to live on land. And this brings us to one of the most dangerous illusions of the digital harbor, this false sense of bravery. Let's talk about that strange kind of courage that we only seem to find behind the keyboard. You know the exact feeling. You type out a harsh boundary or a fiery political opinion, or even a deeply vulnerable confession that you would never have the guts to say to someone's face. You hit send. For about 10 seconds, you feel pretty powerful. You feel brave. But the psychological research tells us that this is not true vulnerability. It's a shield because digital communication removes the immediate facial signals, the social cues. It creates an environment where we feel artificially emboldened. It is an illusion of courage because you are completely protected from real time consequences of the other person's reaction. You don't have to look them in the eye. You don't have to watch their face fall or hear their breath hitch or sit in the awkward, heavy silence that follows a hard truth. In that moment, that screen feels like armor. But what happens when we constantly use armor to communicate? We lose the ability to actually touch anyone. From an attachment perspective, genuine connection requires shared physical risk. When you drop a confrontational bomb in a text thread and then you put your phone on do not disturb, you're not connecting. You're sniping from the crow's nest. This isn't just about anger, it's about vulnerability too. When you text a deep, painful truth because you're afraid to say it out loud, your nervous system knows you're hiding. You get the adrenaline spike of hitting send, but then you're completely robbed of the biological reward of someone physically reaching across a wooden table to say, I've got you. Because the screen protects us from the friction of a live reaction, it creates interactions that are loud but completely hollow. We keep firing off these brave messages into the digital void, wondering why we feel so empty afterward. The truth is that pseudo courage actively moves us further away from human beings. We substitute the messy, terrifying, beautiful reality of face to face vulnerability with a sanitized digital broadcast. And the louder we yell from behind the safety of our screens, the more profoundly isolated our actual lives become. When it is physically and safely possible, we have to stop outsourcing our vulnerability to our keyboards. The screen feels like armor, but when we constantly use armor to communicate, we're not going to reach anyone. We're not going to actually be able to touch anyone. If you want that deep, bone level relief of truly being heard, you have to be brave enough to stand face to face while the other person listens. So let's talk about standing shoulder to shoulder with your crew. What does that neurobiology look like? Okay, some researchers call this co-presence. Now, as a therapist, as I look through the lens of attachment theory, John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth taught us that we are neurobiologically hardwired to seek out our physical proximity to our safe havens. When you are physically in the same room as someone, your nervous system is doing a million complex calculations that screens filter out. You are subconsciously reading their breathing, the micro expressions around the eyes, the pitch of their voice, the synchronized timing of their laugh. An LOL on a screen does not release the same oxytocin and endorphins as genuinely hearing somebody belly laugh across the table. When we rely on the digital world, we heighten interpersonal ambiguity. We lose that spontaneous, unscripted moments of connection that actually build a secure attachment and trust. And now we need to talk about that thing that everybody recognizes, even if they don't have the words for it: the energy in the room. And I don't mean magic, I mean the live, embodied exchange that happens when two nervous systems meet face to face and start tracking each other in real time. When you're sitting across from someone, your brain is taking on a flood of information: the shift in their posture, the warmth or strain in their voice, the pace of their breathing, the timing of their smile, and the way their eyes respond when you say something vulnerable. That stream of cues helps create trust. It lowers ambiguity and it gives your nervous system more evidence that you are safe, that you're seen, and that you're being understood, way more than a screen usually can. That's the energy. It's attention, emotion, physiology, and presence all moving back and forth between people at once. It's the difference between reading the word laughter in a script and actually hearing someone laugh so hard that your own body and mind want to join in with them. When that happens, something shifts inside of you. Your shoulders can drop, your breathing changes. You don't feel as alone, not because someone sent you a symbol of care, an emoji, but because your whole system got to experience care directly. Face to face connection gives us that regulating feedback loop in a way that digital communication often weakens or flattens. So when someone says, I feel different when I'm with a person face to face, they're not imagining it. They're describing a real human process, a co regulation, shared attention, and a deep relief of not having to guess whether or not the other person is really with you. So let's take this a step further. It's not just about how we talk to each other, it's about how we actually live. Right now, society is making it incredibly easy to live our entire lives without ever leaving the cabin. You can work remotely, you can order your groceries online, you can stream your entertainment, you can text your friends, you can have your meals left silently on your doorstep. You can build a completely frictionless 100% online existence. But a frictionless life is a weightless life. When you make your entire existence a digital experience, you turn yourself from an active sailor into a passenger watching a simulation of the sea. Psychological research shows us that completely replacing in person activities with digital conveniences actively degrades our mental health. It makes us vastly more vulnerable to chronic loneliness and depression. Why? Because the human brain did not evolve merely to process data on a glowing rectangle. It evolved to interact with a physical environment and to solve our problems alongside other humans. There is a massive difference between face to face connection and what we might call a side by side connection. Sometimes the best way to feel anchored isn't to sit across the table and stare deeply into someone's eyes. Sometimes it's doing a shared physical task. Think about the difference between watching a YouTube video tutorial on a laser engraving or some hobby that you have in your room versus actually standing in your workshop, in the physical workshop, where you smell the wood that you're working on. You feel it, you smell it, you hear it. The sharp whine of the laser, if you will, since I'm going with that analogy. You hand a physical tool to the person next to you, or think the difference between streaming a movie on your couch versus standing on a wooden stage or holding a script, missing a line, or feeling electric, terrifying thrill of your castmate covering for you in real time. When you do things in person, there is a physical evidence of your existence. You take up space, you bump elbows, you drop things, you make mistakes, and you can't just hit undo or delete. That messiness, that's the friction of the real world. It's actually a feature, not a bug. In DBT, that's dialectical behavioral therapy, one of our core modules is interpersonal effectiveness. You cannot build genuine interpersonal skills in a perfectly curated, editable online world where you can draft a response for 20 minutes before sending it. You build resilience by navigating the awkwardness of a real life conversation. You build it by showing up to a community event or you go to an event with your friends and you deal with differing personalities in real time, face to face. The digital algorithm is designed to curate away your discomfort. But as humans, we actually need a certain amount of discomfort and unpredictability in order to grow. When your entire life is an online experience, you lose serendipity. You lose the spontaneous, unscripted conversation with a stranger that at the store when you're both looking at the same kind of whatever you're there to pick up. You lose the shared groan of a crowd when a sudden rainstorm hits. You lose the tangible, physical proof that you belong to a community. Digital platforms rely heavily on symbolic expressions of life, but they strip away the physiological benefits of actually living it. We aren't just brains in jars meant to exchange data points. We are physical creatures, and we require the messy, inconvenient, and beautiful physical world to actually feel alive. Now, let's talk about introvert and extrovert. Introverts often will argue with me on this point. They don't want to go out. They don't want to socialize. They don't want to interact with other humans. I understand this, but let's talk about some of the reasoning I hear for not going out. Some of you, I can hear this already. My introverts, my socially anxious sailors, if you will, my highly sensitive crewmates. I know you're mentally drafting an email for me right now or making some excuse. I know the arguments you use to justify living an online life because I hear them. I hear them almost every day. You tell yourself the digital world is better for me because I can control my environment. I don't have as much anxiety. I don't have to deal with the sensory overload of a crowded room. You say texting is better because it gives me time to process. I can edit my words so I don't sound stupid. And I don't get that deer in the headlights freeze that I get in person. A common one that I get is online, I can skip the exhausting small talk and jump straight into the deep stuff. I'm just protecting my social battery. Well, listen to me, hear me. As a therapist, I am validating that those feelings are 100% real. The internet is a magnificent tool for people who need a minute to think before they speak. It is a great place to find a niche community when you feel misunderstood. But here is where the therapeutic truth drop comes in. There is a massive difference between protecting your energy and building a fortress of avoidance. When you use your introversion as a blanket to avoid the physical world, you aren't just setting boundaries, you're starving yourself. Let's look at the editing excuse. Yes, texting allows you to perfectly draft your sentences and what you want to say. And there is a place for that. But if you only ever communicate when you have time to edit your words, you're stripping yourself of the chance to be loved in your messy, unedited truth. You start to believe that people only like the rough drafted, proofread version of you, which actually makes your underlying social anxiety worse. And what about the small talk excuse? Introverts hate small talk because it drains them. It takes a lot of energy for an introvert to engage in small talk. But the small talk is the psychological on ramp to a deep talk. You don't just walk up to a stranger and immediately share your deepest childhood trauma. You talk about the weather. You talk about the music you like. You use that low stakes friction to unconsciously test each other's neurobiology, seeing if this person is safe, see if they're really willing to listen. When you try to bypass all of that by living a curated online space, you lose the grit that it takes to navigate the real world. You're taking a very real, a very valid personality trait, introversion, and you're weaponizing it against your own biological need for a physical connection. You might drain your social battery faster than an extrovert does, and that's fine. That happens. But a battery still needs to be plugged in into a real live circuit every once in a while, or the battery itself degrades. So, how do we answer those introvert arguments without turning this into a war on quiet people? We start by telling the truth. Introversion is real, social batteries are real, and online spaces really can help people to pace themselves, think before speaking, and find community that they might miss in local life. But when we make the distinction that matters, a preference for a lower stimulation is not the same thing as a need to build your whole life around avoidance, because research still points to face connection as more powerful for mental health and emotional nourishment than a digital contact alone. When the mind says online it is easier, the counter to that is that easier is not always deeper. When it says I communicate better by text, I would counter that with text may help me organize my thoughts, but in person contact helps my nervous system experience another human being in real time. Now, I will often encourage people to write their thoughts out, edit it, put it all out there. And then when they're done and they're happy with what they're saying, then now that you know what you want to say, go have that talk in person. Go talk to whoever it is that needs to hear this and share that with them in person, face to face. And that puts us back into that engaging connection that we need. When the argument is that small talk is pointless, the answer is small talk is often just a bridge to building trust. Those low stakes exchanges give people a chance to read our tone, pacing, warmth, and the safety before going into a deeper conversation. And this is exactly the kind of live social information that digital communication will often strip away. When the argument is being around people drains me, the answer is then I need a dosage, not a disappearance. Introverts may need less intensity and fewer people and shorter visits and more recovery time, but needing moderation is different from needing exile. And when the argument is our online friends are enough, the answer is not cruel, but it's honest. Online relationships can be meaningful and supportive. But if your whole life becomes mediated through screens, you lose the embodied cues, the spontaneity and co-presence that people feel securely connected rather than merely contacted. We want that connection, not just contact. We want connection. So the goal is not to become an extrovert. The goal is to stop using an introversion as a courtroom defense for chronic disconnection. You do not need louder relationships. You need real ones. Relationships where your body, not just your typing fingers, you get to learn that you're with other people and you can still be safe. No, there's one more piece of this that matters. And sometimes before you reconnect with people, you need to reconnect with the physical world, because the screen does something strange to the soul. It flattens life into images and words and alerts and texts and endless little demands for your attention. It can make your whole existence feel like a series of tabs left open in the mind. So, one of the kindest things you can do for yourself is to unplug. Step away from your glowing rectangle. Put your phone down, turn off your computer, go outside. Go out barefoot. The weather's nice recently, at least here. Go step in the grass. Mind the little doggy landmines. Don't step on those. But go out in your bare feet and just touch the earth. Feel the sun on your face. Feel the breeze. Listen to the birds. These kind of things are amazing to help us feel reconnected to our surroundings. Not because every walk becomes a spiritual awakening, not because the wind solves your trauma, but because your body needs reminders that life is still happening in 3 dimensions. Outside, you are no longer just consuming experience. You are inside of it. You feel the cold air on your face. You hear the birds, the traffic, and the wind. You hear the scrape of your own shoes on the ground. You hear the dogs barking in the neighbor's yard. You notice that the world is not asking you to perform every second. It's simply asking you to be there. And that matters more than we may want to admit. Because when you unplug and go outside, even for 10 minutes, you interrupt that trance of the digital world. You stop living as a floating brain and start remembering that you are a real body, a breathing, moving, sensation, feeling human in a real and actual environment. And once that shift happens, something softens. The nervous system gets a break from that constant ping, ping, ping. It stops the constant comparison, that constant low grade pressure that I have to respond to this. Someone's wrong on the internet. I got to jump in. The mind gets a little more spacious. The heart gets a little less crowded. And sometimes going outside is not about exercise. It's not even about productivity. Sometimes it's just about returning to the reality long enough to hear your own thoughts once again. It helps ground us. So if being with people feels like too much right now, start there. Open the door, go sit on the porch and feel the sunshine hit your face. Sit under a tree. Go for a walk, pet a dog. Let the world remind you that connection is not only social, it's also sensory. It's physical and it's immediate. And from that place, it becomes easier to find your way back to other human beings, because unplugging is not the whole journey, but it's an important first step back to shore. So now the question becomes, what do we do with all of this? If face-to-face connection nourishes us in a way that the digital world cannot fully replace, then healing is not just about thinking differently. It's about physically re-entering the human world, because shared presence gives us kinds of feedback and reassurance that screens will often flatten or weaken. And I know that for some of you, that sounds simple on paper and it sounds terrifying in the body. But when you've been isolated for a long time, solitude starts to feel safer than contact. Now, your cabin may be lonely, but at least it's familiar. This is where I'd like to bring in the DBT lens. We do not wait to feel connected before we move towards people. Does that make sense? You can't build that connection if you never talk to somebody, and you can't wait until you have that connection to talk to somebody, because that requires some effort to build. That can be the small talk that we spoke about earlier. But sometimes we move towards people so the feeling of connection has a chance to return. The urge in isolation is usually to withdraw further, whether we pick up our phones and we isolate that way, or we tell ourselves that I'll reach out tomorrow, and then tomorrow becomes next week. So the practice here is not dramatic, but it is deliberate. You do not need to throw a party and reinvent your whole social life, or even become the most outgoing person in the harbor. You need one embodied moment of contact that reminds your nervous system, right, there are other people, there are other humans here, and I can survive interacting with them and being among them and being part of them. Maybe that looks like sitting, I don't know, at Barnes and Noble instead of staying at home with your phone. Maybe that means attending a chess club or some kind of social gathering, a class, a support group, a church gathering, a game night, a poetry reading. I don't know. The list is endless. But go find something that gets you interacting and being part of a group. Maybe if you're just standing in a line somewhere like the grocery store, long enough to exchange a few words with another person. The point is not performance. The point is presence. The point is connection. And that matters because an in person contact gives you more than conversation. It gives you a rhythm, it gives you eye contact and tone and posture, pauses, these subtle signals that help your brain stop guessing and start settling down. The live exchange helps reduce ambiguity and creates a stronger sense of being seen, being safe, and it gives you that sense way better than a text based or highly mediated communication. These texting and online communications, they don't give you that sense of connection, not typically. Okay, so I want to say this clearly. Start small enough that your body does not interpret the assignment as a punishment. If you're deeply lonely, your instinct may be to either do nothing or demand a giant fix. I need best friends. I need a partner. I need a community that understands me, and I need it now. But human connection usually rebuilds the same way that a ship in harbor does, plank by plank, rope by rope, day by day. Your first act of reconnection might be 10 minutes, not 2 hours. It might be one honest conversation and not a crowded room. It might be that you're choosing the grocery store line with a cashier instead of the self checkout lane because right now your system needs warmth more than efficiency. And here's a deeper truth. Repeated isolation can train you to confuse stimulation with connection. A full inbox is not intimacy. A busy group chat is not the same as belonging. Notifications can make you feel pinged, but they do not make you feel held, connected. Real world connection asks more of us. Yes, it's time. It asks for time, awkwardness, transportation, vulnerability, inconvenience, and the willingness to be known without editing every line before it leaves your mouth. But that inconvenience is part of what makes it real because relationships are not built in perfect timing. They're built in a shared space, shared attention, and small, unrehearsed moments of care and interaction. So this week, I'm going to challenge you not to ask, how can I be less lonely online? I'd ask, where can I place my body in the path of another human life? Where can you let yourself be among people long enough for your heart to remember that connection is not just information passing back and forth? It's an experience. Find one place to drop your anchor, one place where your feet are on the floor, your phone is not in the center of the room, and your nervous system gets to relearn an old truth. I am not meant to do this voyage alone. We are social creatures. We were built to be part of a crew. So today we talked about the difference between being reachable and being relational. We explored how online communication can be useful and accessible. Often it's even easier to manage, but research still suggests that face-to-face connection offers a richer emotional cues and stronger presence, a greater support for mental health than digital contact alone. We look at how an online life can quietly flatten our sense of belonging because screens can simulate connection without fully giving us the embodied experience of being seen and felt and regulated by other people in real time. We also named the arguments that a lot of introverts use in justifying staying online: control, convenience, reduced stimulation, not as much anxiety, and we have time to edit. And we've challenged the idea that those needs require total retreat from an in person life. Underneath all of it was one simple truth: protecting your energy is healthy, but building your whole life around avoidance comes at a devastating cost. Human beings need more than messages. We need moments. We need places and faces and voices and the kind of shared space that reminds us that that we're not meant to sail alone, that we don't have to sail alone. We have people out there that we interact with, that we can connect with. Now, your phone can help you find the harbor, but it cannot become the harbor. So this week, I want you to put yourself somewhere real. I want you to sit at a table, walk into a room, let your life be touched by weather, by other people, by awkwardness, by laughter, and by the holy inconvenience of other human beings. Now, I wish you all well. I know some people are going to find this message to be a little frightening, but don't let it be frightening, mostly. Let a little of that anxiety come in, because that anxiety is part of that experience that we need. If we avoid it all, atrophy and our ability to handle people and going outside becomes more and more difficult. But we need that connection. We need to remember that we're social creatures. We require someone out there to accept us, to be a part of our lives. We require that interaction to help us feel heard, to help us feel connected. So, this has been the Pirate Therapist. I am Lee Perry. I am the Pirate Therapist. So, until next time, guard your peace, tell the truth, and remember, a strong Wi Fi signal is not the same thing as a strong personal connection. So go out there, put your feet in the grass, go talk to somebody, talk to the cashier at the grocery store, talk to someone, connect. So until next week, I wish you fair winds and I wish you sunny skies. You have a wonderful week, and I'll see you again next week.